Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Last of Us Season 1, Episode 4. So, from the last week's episode, I had probably forgotten a few things here or there. Like, there was a scene, of course, of the strawberries, if you guys remember that, where the guys went on to do a trade to get certain seeds, and those seeds end up being strawberries. I forgot about that. There was also to be the scene about the drugs, where like Bill was giving, I think, Frank uh, the medication. Like, okay, make sure you take these, make sure you take those. Like, I probably forgotten about that scene. And so, going into this episode, I would have to say that this episode is very long-winded because, of course, like, we have these kind of Last of Us episodes that are just to be kind of just slow moving. Uh, at the very beginning of this, we have this mostly to be like a road trip kind of thing, and then it eventually picks up by the end and is to give us quite a bit of action and running around, and we end up having a Fedra building being put into this episode, which is to give us characters like Kathleen, or to give us characters like Henry and Sam, which like more and more, like, I'm starting to possibly relate this episode to, like, especially like The Walking Dead, like in the very early seasons. Is kind of how I feel about like this specific episode. But we also have Ellie that is still like bringing in the laughs. Like in this episode, she's going on and giving us this pun book, and she's also like still like trying to figure out ways to just kind of have this adventure be fun, because that's her character. So we and we also have that like magazine scene where she's like, "Oh my god, how does the person even walk?" Yeah. So I feel like I have to go on now and tell you my grade of this episode, as I, of course, was having fun with it. Definitely am going to give it a thumbs up for it being on the positive side of things. I'm just kind of wondering, like, where I should really grade this one, because I feel if I'm grading it too low, people will be like, "No, I thought that this was an epic episode. I thought it was great," and you're like grading it as just kind of like almost middle of the road. What the? So I want to kind of split in between the middle, because I'm not quite sure if I should grade this as a great episode or a good episode, and so I'll state that it's a solid good episode. Because there isn't any infected, and also it's kind of very long-winded. Um, but again, like, there's some good action. There's a shootout that happens, really, and so like even that is like not exactly um, like all that exciting, like, but uh, yeah, still like the episode though, still like the show. There could go on and be certain people that honestly just don't like this show for how slow it is, or maybe they were to even have gone on and like watched people play the game and just never liked it or never understood it or whatever. So yeah, so a lot of people could just like not like this show, and they'd be like, "Man, like this guy is every week telling me how great this is, and I just can't see that." And I can understand that, but hopefully you people are like me and you just kind of like, "Yeah, I really enjoy this." Like, there's a lot of people that have way more knowledge than I do about this. Um, and plus, also, for me going on and stating that there is not any infected to be seen in this episode, I realized what a lot of people are like, "Wait a minute, like, there's that whole scene where Kathleen and Perry are going into that one place, and like some of the ground is moving around, and you're not telling me that there's not any infected in this episode." I'm like, well, yeah, any visible infected. Uh, we also get some backstory on where Tommy is now, because we had seen him in the past, if you guys don't remember from the first episode. So that I think is kind of really interesting. So with that said, I think I'm just going to go on and just roll into spoilers because I'm getting kind of close there anyways. So this road trip eventually leads us to Fedra, and Fedra leads us to characters like Kathleen, Henry, Sam, and so on and so forth. Like we have this kind of just big area of all these people. So let's just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time is about that time. We just spoil these episodes, regardless of what I just said there. I think it just kind of gets to the point where I just kind of like I've said that like so many times that I don't even state it in English anymore. So let's go into these episodes. Or this episode. So in the beginning of this, we have Ellie that is in this bathroom looking at her reflection holding a gun. And so she then takes all the bullets out of the gun and is to even take the one bullet that is in the chamber, and she just kind of puts the gun into the mirror and she clicks it. And so it's like, yeah, like I guess Ellie is just like, hey man, like I look so cool. Cause you get those moments, you get those times where look at like the Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern movie, where when Ryan Reynolds like becomes the Green Lantern and he's kind of looking at his reflection in the mirror as he's Green Lantern, and he's like, yeah, and then the fish the fish lantern is like, well, hey man, like, are you done looking in your reflection in your mirror? Like, I get it, like we all did it, but so after Ellie goes on from the bathroom of which that she was at, she goes on and is to see that Joel is trying to siphon off gasoline. And so Ellie is to talk to Joel about gas, and she's like, well, do we really have to do this like as often as we should? And Joel is like, well, yeah, because like over time, like gas will break down. And so like gas isn't as effective as it once was. And so now Joel is to tell like Ellie that like years ago there would used to be that like gas would be like water, that you could go on and use like 1 gallon and it would get you very far. Here's also my thought. Like, why then don't they have like an electric car then? Or like a hybrid, or some cars that eventually would run on water? Because if you were to ever to have gone on and watched the That 70s show, we would have the one guy who'd always get high, and he would talk about the car. The like, hey man, there's a car that runs on water, man. You would have thought if they would have gone on and had cars, you would have thought that would be the one thing that they would try to get. Plus, we also have, when we get to the Fedra place, like there's a bunch of cars that are just out and about. So, clearly. Anyways, we have Joel that goes on and talks about like gas, and so they get in the car and or no let's get this out. So Ellie, when Joel is siphoning off gas, Ellie goes on and is to start cracking jokes. And so it gets to the point where when Ellie keeps using these jokes, we even have Joel, who's kind of heard a certain number of them, like, well, hey, did you read this book? And Joel's like, no, 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 no. Like he probably just knew that joke. But so Ellie is to find this pun book and is to start rattling off certain jokes. Like there's a mermaid joke that she uses, and so on and so forth. And so like these are like dad jokes, somewhat. So after that, we then have Joel and Ellie that get into the truck and they start to drive off. And come to find out, they are to get like a thing of music, and so they start listening to the music. We have one point have Ellie that is to start to look through this truck, and she finds this magazine with obviously some naked dudes in it. And Ellie all of a sudden sees that she's like, oh my god, like, how does this guy walk? Because evidently he has a schwang that is pretty dang big. And so Joel is trying to tell Ellie, it's like, well, hey, like, don't look at that magazine, like, stop. Because Ellie is talking about how there's like very few articles and that she can kind of just see a lot of pictures. So Joel is telling Ellie, like, please just stop reading that, just stop looking into that. And so Ellie herself kind of just chucks the magazine out, and so they just continue to drive while they're listening to this song, and that's kind of where we kind of focus on. So we go on to then have them drive off into this forest. And the weirdest thing about me is I'm just thinking that in a zombie infection, I just find it so weird that these people are just sleeping out in the open. It just seems so odd to me. I would never go on, and if I was involved in a zombie invasion, or whatever, however you want to call and phrase it, a zombie apocalypse. However, I would not go on and sleep outside or sleep in an open area unless it was the very last thing I could possibly do. If I got knocked out and I slept that way, or like I could not rationalize in a zombie apocalypse sleeping out in the open. There's too many things that could go horribly awry, and plus also you could awake with a gun in your face. But so, like what basically happens by the end of this episode. So, Joel and Ellie are to kind of just sleep, and so we're having Ellie that I think is like talking about like making a fire, and Joel is like, no, that's a stupid decision. And Ellie's like, well, why? Because the infected will see it. And Joel's like, no, like if anything, because this place is so remote, like the infected won't come here, but like people will. And if anything, I'm sure Joel would probably state to Ellie, it's like, well, I'm sure you're gonna want uh like the infected more than you probably would zombie, or infected more than you would a normal person, because a human could go on and do any number of things where like a zombie will just want to eat you and kill you, and it'll be hopefully quick. So where a human would probably want to play with you and then kill you because they're crazy, because who knows how long they've been out and about. So Ellie goes on and is to probably tell a couple of jokes, what I remember. And so the following morning, Ellie seems to be awakened by the sound of Joel making coffee. And Ellie had no clue what that was. And so she opens the thing and she's like, what is that? And Joel's like, what, you don't like coffee? So Ellie is to kind of turn and possibly either wake up or just kind of go back to sleep. And so when they get back into the truck, we have Joel who's kind of just consistently just kind of sipping on this coffee because he had said the night before that his plan is that he's going to go on and like sleep really good tonight because he's going to drive like all day and all night and hopefully get to Wyoming by like the following day is what he hopes. So Joel is kind of consistently just kind of sipping on this coffee, and so Ellie is to state that like this coffee is to smell like burnt crap, and Joel goes on. It's like, well, like this is the best that he can get. So, man, it must be like just rough for Joel. Like it seems like he can kind of just get everything at his fingertips. Like it doesn't feel like any other kind of zombie apocalypse where people are just like, man, like I used to love Slim Jims and I used to love this and like now like I can't get that anywhere. It's kind of like the zombie land where the guy is just desperate for a Twinkie and he can't get a Twinkie. It's like that. Where Joel, it seems like he always has that Twinkie or always has that one thing that he always has ever wanted. So we have Ellie and Joel, and we have Ellie who asks Joel about Tommy. And so while like Ellie is also giving Joel like directions. So Joel talks about Tommy, and what happened is that Tommy had gone on with Joel and met up with Tess, and then at some point Tommy had like separated to go off and kind of go with the Fireflies, and so like that's kind of the main chunk or the main kind of crux of that story. And we'll find out later in the episode that Joel, when he was with Tommy and Tess, like they would go on and try to do anything to survive. And when Joel and Ellie like get close to that Fedra base, and certain people are trying to play off that they're hurt, but they're really not. Like Joel immediately knew that because he's like, yeah, I played that game before. And so like we used to do a lot of stuff to try and survive, and that would be like taking advantage of innocent people and probably killing them. So Joel and Ellie get to a point where they are to kind of drive and realize that they like can't get into this, like I think it's like a bridge or a tunnel, and it seems that there's like a whole vehicle that is kind of blocking that one place. So we have Joel that just kind of backs up and he's like, well, like I think that I can go on and kind of figure out a way that we can still get to that same place, but like we just kind of have to go like around. So Joel continues to drive as now Ellie is to try to like read this map, and so he's like, well, where am I going? And Ellie's like, I don't know, like this is my second day in a car, and you're telling me like and I'm trying to read this and I'm so she's like, well, like we're evidently heading north, so that's a good sign. So Joel and Ellie are now like making their way through this town to then find that there's a Fedra base right there, and so Joel's like, oh my god, like we have gone into the worst part of this town. And so that's when we see a guy named Brian, and he's stating that he's hurt, and we have Ellie that's like, well, hey, maybe we should stop him. We should help him. And Joel's like, no, we shouldn't. So Joel and Ellie start driving off, and so what happens is they're trying to get away from all of these people, these mercenary like guys, and so they pop all their tires, and so Joel just kind of uh, drives his way into this building that crashes through this window, and so that's where we start to get this shootout. And having Joel crash in this building was very clever. So like no one could go on and really get like the high ground on him if he kind of just stopped and just kind of parked his car somewhere and was trying to see where everyone was. So like no one could like snipe him from a good distance off or something like that. So Joel crashes his way into this building, and so Joel finds that there's a room next door that Ellie has to go on and like squeeze through this little hole that like a guy like Joel couldn't squeeze through, but Ellie could. So Joel tells Ellie to like, hey, like just go down to the ground and just kind of squeeze through this little hole. So there are certain points where now we're like seeing this from Ellie's perspective, and like I really feel like we like have to see like things from Joel's perspective, or we're seeing things from Ellie's perspective, because we're not clearly knowing what all is going on. So we have Ellie that's going on and like thinking that she needs to get her gun, and she also has like her knife ready, and so she's like I don't know what to expect here because maybe Joel will get killed, and then I'll have to like do something. So like we start to hear some like gunshots, and we're kind of like, okay, is Joel dead? Is he still alive? So Joel ends up wrestling with Brian, and Brian, it seems, is kind of choking Joel out. So Ellie, kind of figuring out what's going on, is to head back into the other room where Joel is, and she fires upon Brian, and so Brian falls over and he's desperately pleading to not have them kill him. It's like, well, hey man, like let's be friends, like how about we trade, like please don't kill me. Brian is going on and talking about how he can't feel his legs, that maybe that shot had paralyzed him, and so Joel is to look at Ellie. It's like, well, hey, like give me your knife, and or no, I think no. What happens is uh Brian, it seems, is to kind of throw his knife at them, and Joel picks it up. Is like, hey man, like you want that knife, you can keep the knife. And so Joel ends up telling Ellie like go back into that room, and so Joel goes on into killing Brian, and then we end up getting another scene. So Kathleen is holding a guy named uh, Elderstein, and I was like, oh my god, this is John Getz. Like, I remember like seeing John Getz in like so many things, and like I was like, great, like this guy's on here. Um, and so like to also see like Mulaney, uh, that I've kind of seen her in a lot of things also. But so like I remember she was in like the George Clooney movie, the Up in the Air. Anyways, so I was like, hey, great, like actors that I know, because I would assume that like most of the show would probably just have like a lot of nobodies and like, oh hey, who, yeah, like you would think that this show would have like all the stops and just be like, man, like these actors, like they're getting some really highbrow, but it seems that also in the last episode they had like Nick Offerman, which I was like, yeah, that was a great choice. Anyways, so Kathleen is talking to Elderstein, and we come to find out that Kathleen's brother had gone on to be like tortured and brutally killed. And so now that Kathleen is to go on and to hold Elderstein captive, she is asking where Henry is. Because it seems that this guy is to know. And Elderstein is to state that, like, hey, I'm a doctor, like, you shouldn't go on and you shouldn't kill me because of how valuable I am now. Because that's always the play, right? Like, the people who are to have certain skills that not everyone else has, it's like, oh, well, you need me to stay alive, because you're going to need a doctor in this world. But so we have Elderstein that goes on and is to use things against Kathleen. It's like, well, hey, like, I delivered you, I like brought you into this world, and this and that. And so Kathleen goes on and is to want information from Elderstein and wants to know, like, if he has the ability to give her this information of where Henry could be, because of the state that he's possibly in, and so on and so forth. So we have Elderstein that is desperately pleading to Kathleen. It's like, well, hey, like this needs to stop. Like, this needs to stop now. Like, what you're doing is just like, this is just wrong. And Kathleen, it's like, oh, like, so it's wrong now that it's being done to you. And I was like, wow, like, okay, so that kind of tells us a lot of these characters, like where they've been and what they've seen and what they've dealt with. And I thought that this was like really good dialogue to just kind of really help us understand who these new people are. So Kathleen had gone on to state that, like, Ellerstein had given up some information in the past, and that was all because he had a gun to his head. And so that's when Kathleen is like, oh, like, so, like, are you going to give me this information now that I'm holding a gun to your head? Like, is this state now, like, a thing that you'll give up information for? So, Elderstein doesn't tell her where Henry is, and so Kathleen goes on to then have guys like Perry and certain other people bring in like Brian and the guys who had died because of Joel. And so Joel ends up going to the room where Ellie's in, and then their whole plan is for them to go on and go to like the tallest building that they can find, so they of course can kind of sleep for that night, but also so that way they can kind of see where they're going for the following day. So we have Kathleen that goes on to find the people who had been killed by Joel and Ellie. Technically, mostly just Joel doing most of the work. So Kathleen is talking about that these men who are now dead, it could have actually been that Henry had radioed someone in, and those were these people. Because who knows what Henry has at his disposal. And Kathleen is telling all these guys, like, okay, like, I want you all to go on and find whoever is collaborating with Henry, whoever is involved, and just wipe them out. So Kathleen is to also go on and ask if these men, if their wounds, if any of them are going to really be helped, if there's a doctor present. And we immediately have the guys who are like, no, like, they're well past saving. And so We have Kathleen that goes right into that cell and goes on to shoot the doctor and then just goes right back to what she was doing. So everybody from the Fedra building all goes out to start looking around. We start seeing like certain like graffiti that is on certain vehicles, like "We the People," or we see this kind of I think this like plow or like bulldozer that says the word "run," and like I was like, okay, this is like really interesting. Speaking of a plow, I think we had at one point where Joel was talking about like a plow at some point via this episode. But so we have all these people that are going on and trying to look for Joel and Ellie and Henry and whoever. So Joel and Ellie are now kind of looking out at this window with this building that has all these like newspapers where the window is. So we have this moment where we get them to talk about like where they're going to go, which is the tall building. When they see like one kind of truck move or drive off, that like that's where they're heading. So, but Joel and Ellie, they have this moment where Joel is to talk about like Ellie like shooting that guy, and really like for me like it was really good to have this talk because like at some point we have to realize that Ellie is going to be forced to lose her innocence, that at some point she's going to have to make some tough decisions if she hasn't already, and she is going to have to like kill a lot as for either survival because it might be an infected, or she's going to have to kill to just save herself from probably getting killed by someone. But so we have Joel who's like not really good at also like talking to Ellie, and he realizes this. But so but like he keeps trying to do it, and like they have an interesting conversation later how like Joel is telling Ellie, it's like, well, yeah, like this is a really rough age for you. And so Ellie is like, well, does this get any easier because you're older? And Joel is like, well, no. So, like, either way, like, this is rough at any age for dealing with this. And so, yeah. So, what Joel does go on and do is to show, like, Ellie how to fire a gun and how to put her thumbs on this gun. Or so when Joel is to try to like take it from Ellie, like Ellie has like this firm grip. So it's kind of like the Terminator Salvation thing where we had Kyle Reese who was holding on to that one like shotgun thing, and we have like the Terminator character that goes on and is to tie a string to the shotgun. So even if someone is to go on and like grab the shotgun from you, like you'll still have that string, and you can kind of just yank it back and keep the shotgun for yourself. So like that's kind of like what we're really seeing here. So Ellie goes on and is to put the gun in her like back pocket of her jeans, and Joel's like, no, 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 like don't put your gun there. Like you could probably shoot your butt off. So like you should really go on and like put your gun in your pack. So Ellie goes on and doesn't listen to Joel and doesn't put her gun in the backpack. She just puts her gun in her pocket. So we then have them run off to this other building, and so they start to go on and start to walk up these stairs, and so Joel says that there's like 45 or 40 something floors, And Ellie's like, well, are you gonna like just walk every one of them? And Joel's like, no, like I'm gonna just walk as much as I can. So we get them to walk quite a few floors, and at one point, like Joel kind of just sits down for a little bit, and Ellie's like, well, hey, get your lazy butt up. And so as she like kind of lifts him up, and he's like, I'm 56, you lazy piece of shit. It's like it's the other episode where we go on and have like Tess going and telling Ellie, it's like, well, hey, like our knees aren't as good as yours is, because we always have to have that like whole age thing where uh certain people are to not like be like in better shape than others just because of how like brutal their lives have been. Um and how like an injury and whatever could just really derail you, especially if going into this kind of world. So we have Joel and we have Ellie that go on to make their way into this room, and so they're kind of preparing these two like couch things to eventually sleep on. And so Joel takes all of this glass and is to pour it all around the door. And Ellie's like, well, why are you doing that? And like our what Joel is doing, like I remember like Tom Cruise doing that same exact thing in like the first Mission Impossible movie. So I'm kind of wondering if they like got that idea from that. Um, or there was also to be uh, like conspiracy theory, the Mel Gibson movie where he goes on and puts an empty beer bottle and he puts it on the door, and so if anybody's to ever like open the door, like the beer falls and it breaks, and like the guy would be able to hear it. So Joel goes on and puts all this glass all around the door, and Ellie asks why, and Joel's like, well, because if somebody like comes through the door, then I'll be able to hear it. And Ellie is like, oh, okay, so if anybody tries to come in here, it's like, oh, okay. So Ellie is to ask Joel, it's like, well, hey, uh like I obviously realize that you like don't have like good hearing from one ear, and so it's like, what happens if like you can't hear and like somebody comes in here? So like Joel states that he can't hear very well because of uh him having to like fire guns so often. And so yeah, so what better way to have a person that can hear like Ellie? So yeah, because I had realized that too. Like, there's a whole reason why when you would go on and see people like fire off guns, that's why they would always have those like noise canceling things on them, or they would have like the earplugs, because yeah, like guns are loud. So immediately you would go on to think like the most guys who would go through all these action movies, you would think that a certain number of people would all eventually be deaf at some point because of how often they would have to go on and fire all these rounds and shoot all these things. And so yeah, so like a lot of people make the joke of like, well, yeah, I'm sure Keanu Reeves is now deaf from all those John Wick movies. But so we also have the scene where Kathleen is out and about, and she's with Perry, and so Kathleen can't find anything of Henry's, and Kathleen turns to Perry, and it seems that they go on and they have them find this attic, and she goes into it, and she sees that there's a bunch of empty corn cans, and we have this attic that has a bunch of these like seemingly superhero like drawings, and they're of course of an early kid that is to, I guess, really love drawing. So Kathleen goes on and meets with Perry, and it's like, okay, like it seems like they're really running out of food. So like Kathleen mentions that she feels that they're really close, and like it's only a matter of time before they catch them. So Perry is to go on and take Kathleen to this one location and shows her that there is to be kind of infected underground. And so that might go on to be like a specialty zombie and stuff like that. So Perry is asking Kathleen, it's like, well, hey, like, shouldn't we tell like people about this? And Kathleen's like, no, like, don't tell them anything yet. And Perry's like, are you serious? Like, shouldn't we go on it? And Kathleen's like, no, like, just don't make it a thought right now. So we go on to have Joel and Ellie that then are to like go on and like they're tempted to go on and sleep, and so we have Ellie that is kind of cracking jokes, and we have one point where Ellie makes this scarecrow joke, and Joel immediately knows the response to the joke, and Ellie's like, well, hey, did you read these books? Did you read this book? Joel's like, no, 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 no. So we consistently have them kind of like, are they going to go to sleep? Are they not going to go to sleep? Does they continue to just kind of talk to one another? And so that's when we had the whole conversation about like the whole age thing, where like it's never a thing to get used to, no matter how young or old you are. And we have Joel asking, because Ellie had stated that she had to kind of make some tough decisions before, and Joel asks Ellie, it's like, well, what did you mean by that? And Ellie's like, well, I don't want to talk about it. Kind of like how when Ellie asked Joel, it's like, well, hey, did you have to kill innocent people? Like, Joel didn't want to talk about it either. Because, again, it's a tough decision. It's a tough thing. And, like, you don't want to go on and, like, and tell a person, and it's like, well, yeah, like, I had to murder all these people, and I felt horrible about it. Um, but yeah, so we had Joel and we had Ellie, and they're cracking wise. They're trying to tell jokes because this world sucks, the world they live in, even though it's a great story. So they finally go on and they finally fall asleep, and by the time that they wake up, we all of a sudden have Ellie, who is to try to wake Joel up because we now find that Ellie and Joel are not alone. That both Henry and both Sam are to be holding a gun onto them. And so I'm assuming that they are, like, obviously not going to kill Ellie and Joel off. That wouldn't just make any sense. Like, I feel that we could probably have some understanding between these people, which won't lead into to death or whatever. But so with that said, that's kind of how this episode ends. And I think at the end of all this, I think I'm just going to quickly try and wrap this up. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything that I did forget about, because maybe by the following episode, I'll just be like, oh yeah, like, let me rebuttal about this and talk about that. But I think I got kind of the main stuff out of the way, kind of like the main stuff that they were talking about. But other than that, I think it's about that time to just call it an episode. Let me know how you felt about this episode specifically, or if to talk about anything that it was to have happened earlier. Yeah, just let me know how you've been feeling about this show so far. If you didn't like it, if you like it, if you enjoy it, whatever. So, goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.